July 12th, 1943. 6:15 in the morning. The sun is barely above the horizon near the village of Prokhorovka, and Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann is standing in the turret hatch of his Panzer IV, scanning the steppe through binoculars that fog with his breath. The grass stretches endlessly in every direction, golden and dry, rippling like an ocean in the early morning wind. Behind him, arranged in a formation that took 3 hours to assemble in the pre-dawn darkness, 119 other German tanks idle with engines rumbling. The sound is tremendous. It rolls across the flat earth like distant thunder that never stops. Hoffmann has been in Russia for 14 months. He has seen things that will never leave him. But this morning feels different. This morning feels like the end of something. He does not know how right he is. In approximately 4 hours, 109 of these tanks will be burning wreckage. Their crews will be dead, wounded, or crawling through sunflower fields trying to escape Soviet infantry, hunting them like animals. The greatest tank battle in human history is about to begin, and this particular formation, under the command of Generalmajor Heinrich Krauss, is about to drive straight into a Soviet trap so devastating that it will be studied in military academies for the next 80 years as an example of exactly what not to do. 120 tanks will attack, 11 will return. The mathematics of annihilation work out to a 90.8% destruction rate, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how 109 German tanks and over 400 trained crewmen were erased from existence in a single morning, we need to go back. Back to the planning rooms where this disaster was born. Back to the egos and assumptions that made it inevitable. And back to a German general who believed so completely in the superiority of his tanks and his men that he ignored every piece of intelligence suggesting he was about to lead them into a slaughter. Heinrich Krauss was born in 1891 in Bavaria, the son of a school teacher who wanted his boy to become a lawyer. The boy had other ideas. By age 17, he was obsessed with cavalry tactics, spending his evenings sketching battle formations and reading accounts of Napoleonic charges. There was something romantic about it to him. The speed, the shock, the way a massed cavalry attack could shatter an enemy line through sheer psychological terror before a single saber was swung. When the Great War began, Krauss was 23 years old and a freshly commissioned lieutenant in a Bavarian cavalry regiment. He spent the first months of the war still believing in the glory of the mounted charge. By 1916, he had watched enough horses and men torn apart by machine guns to understand that the old ways were dead. But something in him never fully accepted it. Somewhere deep in his military thinking, he still believed in the decisive blow, the massed attack, the concentrated force that overwhelms through shock and speed. This belief would serve him reasonably well for 2 decades, and then it would kill 400 of his men in a single morning. Between the wars, Krauss rose steadily through the ranks. He was intelligent, efficient, and possessed the kind of rigid confidence that impressed his superiors. When Germany began rebuilding its military in the 1930s, Krauss transitioned naturally into the new panzer divisions. He saw tanks the same way he had once seen cavalry, mobile shock troops, breakthrough weapons, the point of the spear that would punch through enemy lines and create chaos in the rear. He was not wrong about any of this. German panzer tactics in the early war were revolutionary, and Krauss proved himself a capable commander during the invasions of Poland and France. His division moved fast, hit hard, and achieved objectives ahead of schedule. He earned decorations, he earned promotions, he earned a reputation as an aggressive commander who got results. But Poland and France were not Russia. By July 1943, the Eastern Front had been grinding for 2 years. The initial German advances had stalled. Stalingrad had been a catastrophe. And now, near a bulge in the front lines around the city of Kursk, both sides were preparing for what everyone knew would be a decisive confrontation. The Germans called their offensive Operation Citadel. It was supposed to pinch off the Kursk salient, trap massive Soviet forces, and restore momentum to the Eastern Front. The Soviets knew it was coming. They had been preparing for months. Heinrich Krauss knew none of this, or rather, he knew it intellectually, but he did not believe it mattered. He had spent 2 years watching Soviet forces collapse under concentrated German tank attacks. He had seen them break and run. He had developed a certain contempt for their equipment, their training, their leadership. His confidence had curdled into arrogance. On the night of July 11th, intelligence reports reached Krauss indicating significant Soviet armor concentrations in the area his division would attack the following morning. The reports suggested at least 200 enemy tanks, possibly more, supported by extensive anti-tank positions, artillery and infantry, dug in along a defensive line that had been prepared for months. Krauss read the reports. Then he set them aside. His reasoning was straightforward. German tanks were superior. German crews were better trained. German tactics were more aggressive. Yes, the Soviets had numbers, but numbers meant nothing against quality. His 120 tanks would punch through the Soviet line like a fist through wet paper. Once they were through, they would wheel north and link up with other German formations, completing the encirclement that would win the battle. He briefed his officers that evening with absolute certainty. The attack would begin at 0630. They would advance in a tight formation, maximum speed, overwhelming the Soviet positions before they could react effectively. There would be no preliminary artillery bombardment. Speed and surprise were more important than suppression. They would be through the enemy line within 2 hours. Oberleutnant Hoffmann was in that briefing. Years later, in a memoir that was never published, he would write that he felt a coldness in his stomach as Krauss spoke. The general's eyes were bright, almost feverish. He spoke of the coming attack the way a man might speak of a horse race he had already fixed. There was no acknowledgement of risk, no discussion of what might go wrong. No contingency planning, just certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty. Hoffmann returned to his tank that night and told his crew to write letters home, just in case. July 12th, 0615. The formation is assembled. 120 Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs arranged in a broad wedge. Engines warming in the cool morning air. Hoffmann can see Krauss's command tank near the center of the formation, its antenna marking it clearly. The general will lead from the front. Say what you will about the man. He is not a coward. The order comes at exactly 6:30. Forward. The tanks begin to move. The ground shakes. The noise is beyond description. A wall of mechanical thunder that rolls across the steppe. Hoffmann drops into his turret and closes the hatch, leaving it cracked just enough to see. The interior of the tank smells of oil, sweat, and the particular metallic tang of fear. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happens. The formation advances across open ground, crushing the dry grass beneath their tracks. The sun climbs higher, burning off the morning haze. Hoffmann watches the horizon through his vision slit, looking for movement, looking for the enemy he knows is out there. They crest a low rise, and suddenly he can see the Soviet positions. They are perhaps 800 meters ahead, a line of earthworks and gun pits stretching across the horizon. And behind them, hull down and waiting, Soviet tanks, T-34 seconds, KV 1 second, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. For a moment, the battlefield is frozen. Two armored forces staring at each other across a stretch of Russian steppe. Then the Soviets open fire. The first shell hits a panzer, 3 on the left flank. The tank does not explode immediately. It simply stops, a plume of black smoke beginning to rise from its engine deck. Then the ammunition cooks off, and the turret lifts off the hull on a pillar of orange flame, spinning lazily through the air before crashing down 30 meters away. The battle has begun. Krauss's response is immediate and exactly wrong. Instead of spreading his formation, seeking cover, or probing for weaknesses in the Soviet line, he orders a charge. All tanks forward. Maximum speed. Overwhelm them. 119 remaining tanks surge forward into the Soviet kill zone. What happens next takes approximately 45 minutes. It feels like 45 hours. The Soviet defensive line is not a line at all. It is a web. Anti-tank guns are positioned in interlocking fields of fire, each covering the others. Soviet tanks are hull down in prepared positions, only their turrets exposed, their lower hulls protected by the earth itself. And behind them, invisible in the tree line, Soviet artillery has been registered on the exact ground the Germans are now crossing. The German formation drives into this web at full speed. Hoffmann's tank is near the right edge of the formation. He watches the center dissolve. Tanks are hit from the front by dug in Soviet armor, from the flanks by anti-tank guns, from above by artillery. They brew up in ones and twos and then in clusters. The radio is chaos. Screaming voices, fragmentary orders, calls for help that cut off mid-sentence. Krauss is still ordering the charge. Keep moving. Press the attack. Break through. But there is nothing to break through to. The Soviet line is too deep, too well prepared. For every position the Germans overrun, there is another behind it, and another behind that. The attack is not punching through wet paper, it is driving into a meat grinder. By 0700, the German formation has lost cohesion entirely. Tanks are scattered across the battlefield, fighting individual duels with Soviet armor, trying to find cover in the slight folds of the terrain. Hoffmann's driver finds a shallow depression and they drop into it, hull down, trading shots with a T-34 that is trying to flank them. The T-34 fires. Misses. Hoffmann's gunner adjusts. Fires. The Soviet tank shudders and smoke begins pouring from its hatches. But there is no time to celebrate. Another T-34 is moving up from the left, and another. The Soviets have reserves. The Germans do not. At 0715, Hoffmann sees Krauss's command tank take a direct hit. The shell penetrates the turret, and the tank simply stops. No explosion. No fire. Just stillness. Later, they will find the general's body still in the commander's position, killed instantly by the penetrating round. He never knew what hit him. With Krauss dead, the attack has no leadership. The senior surviving officer, a major named Schumann, manages to get on the radio and order a withdrawal. But withdrawal is easier to order than to execute. The Soviets have pushed forward on both flanks. They are behind the German formation now. The retreat becomes a gauntlet. Hoffmann's tank is hit at 0742. An anti-tank round strikes the track assembly and the tank slews sideways, immobilized. Hoffmann orders his crew to bail out. They tumble through the hatches into the smoke and noise, scrambling for cover behind their own crippled vehicle. Around them, the battlefield is a nightmare landscape of burning tanks, shell craters, and bodies. The driver, a 20-year-old from Hamburg named Fischer, is hit by shrapnel as they run. He goes down without a sound, and Hoffmann has to make the decision no commander ever wants to make. Leave him or die trying to help him. He leaves him. The 3 surviving crew members crawl through a field of sunflowers that have been flattened by tank tracks. The flowers are chest high where they still stand, their yellow faces nodding absurdly above the carnage. Soviet infantry is moving through the battlefield now, and Hoffmann can hear them calling to each other, methodical, hunting. They hide in a shell crater until nightfall. By the time darkness comes, the Battle of Prokhorovka has effectively ended. The German offensive has been stopped cold. The Kursk salient will hold. Operation Citadel will fail. The Eastern Front has turned, permanently and irreversibly, in the Soviets' favor. And of the 120 tanks that charged across that steppe at 0630, 11 will eventually make it back to German lines. Hoffmann is not in one of them. He and his 2 surviving crew members spend 3 nights moving through Soviet-held territory, traveling only in darkness, hiding during the day. They survive on water from streams and sunflower seeds scraped from the fields they pass through. On the 3rd night, they stumble into a German patrol that nearly shoots them before recognizing their uniforms. The debrief takes 4 hours. Hoffmann tells them everything. The intelligence that was ignored, the formation that was too tight, the charge into prepared positions, the complete absence of artillery support, the death of the general, the disintegration of the division. His report is filed. It will be read by staff officers who will shake their heads and make notes about tactical failures. Lessons will be learned, they will say. Adjustments will be made. But there is no adjustment that can bring back 400 dead men. There is no lesson that can resurrect 109 destroyed tanks. There is only the mathematics of annihilation, written in burning steel and scattered bone across a Russian field. The 11 tanks that returned were rebuilt and sent back into combat. 9 of them were destroyed in subsequent engagements. By the end of 1943, only 2 of the original 120 Panzers remained in service, and both of those were eventually knocked out in early 1944. The equipment loss was catastrophic, but equipment can be replaced. The men could not. Of the approximately 480 crew members who participated in the attack, roughly 120 were killed outright on the battlefield. Another 200 were wounded, many of them severely. 63 were captured by Soviet forces and spent the remainder of the war in prison camps. Fewer than 100 escaped the battle unwounded and free. Hoffmann was one of them. He was given a 2-week leave and then reassigned to a training unit in occupied Poland. The army decided that his experience was too valuable to risk in combat again. He spent the remaining 18 months of the war teaching young men how to operate tanks they would likely die in. He never spoke about what happened at Prokhorovka. Not to his students, not to his fellow officers, not to his wife, whom he married in the winter of 1944 during a brief leave. The memories were locked away in a compartment of his mind that he trained himself never to open. But at night, in his dreams, he was always back in that sunflower field, always crawling through the flattened stalks, always hearing Fischer call out behind him, the voice getting fainter, asking for help he could not give. The war ended. Germany was defeated. Hoffmann was captured by American forces and spent 8 months in a prisoner of war camp before being released. He returned to what was left of Bavaria, found his wife, and tried to rebuild something like a normal life. He worked as a mechanic, then as a driving instructor, then as a municipal clerk. Ordinary jobs for an ordinary man who had once commanded a tank in the largest armored battle in human history. He raised 2 children, a boy and a girl. He voted in elections, he paid his taxes, he attended church on Christmas and Easter. He never talked about the war. In 1978, a historian tracking down survivors of the Prokhorovka battle located Hoffmann through municipal records. The historian wanted to interview him, to record his memories for posterity. Hoffmann agreed to meet him at a cafe in Munich. He sat across from the young academic, ordered coffee, and listened to the questions. Then he stood up, placed money on the table for his untouched coffee, and walked out without saying a word. The historian wrote in his notes that Hoffmann had seemed perfectly calm until the moment he left. There was no visible emotion, no anger, no tears, just a man rising from his chair and walking away from a past he had spent 35 years trying to forget. Hoffmann died in 1991, at the age of 72. His obituary mentioned his military service only in passing. Husband, father, grandfather. A quiet man who kept to himself. The sunflowers still grow in the fields around Prokhorovka. Every July they bloom in the same soil where 109 German tanks burned themselves into wreckage and ash. The ground there is still contaminated with metal fragments, engine oil, and the trace elements of things no one wants to name. Farmers who work those fields occasionally turn up artifacts with their plows, twisted steel, ammunition casings, sometimes bones. There is a memorial now, a large concrete structure that commemorates the battle. Tour buses bring visitors who take photographs and read the plaques. The plaques tell a story of Soviet heroism, of the turning point on the Eastern Front, of the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. They do not mention Heinrich Krauss. They do not mention his certainty. They do not mention the intelligence reports he ignored, or the formation he kept too tight, or the charge he ordered into a prepared kill zone. History remembers the battle. History does not remember the precise species of arrogance that made it so one-sided. 120 tanks, 11 returned. Think about that number. Think about the men inside those 109 destroyed vehicles. Each tank carried a crew of 5. Each man had a name, a hometown. Parents who received telegrams. Sweethearts who waited for letters that would never come. Each one woke up on the morning of July 12, 1943, ate whatever breakfast was available, checked his equipment, and climbed into a steel box that would become his coffin before noon. They were not innocent. They were soldiers of a genocidal regime, fighting a war of annihilation that had already killed millions. Many of them had participated in atrocities. Many of them believed in things that were monstrous. History does not require us to mourn them, but history does require us to understand them. The men who died at Prokhorovka did not die because they were cowards. They did not die because they were incompetent. They died because a general who should have known better sent them into a battle that could not be won, for reasons that had more to do with ego than strategy. They died because Heinrich Krauss could not admit, even to himself, that his enemy had prepared a trap he was incapable of escaping. Arrogance kills. That is the lesson. Not just the arrogance of individual commanders, but the arrogance of systems, of ideologies, of nations that convince themselves they cannot be defeated because they do not deserve to be. The Germans at Kursk believed they were superior. Their tanks were better designed, their crews were better trained, their tactics were more sophisticated. All of this was arguably true, and none of it mattered, because the Soviets had prepared a defensive system so thorough, so deep, so carefully designed to absorb and destroy exactly the kind of attack the Germans were planning. Quality met quantity, confidence met preparation, and 109 tanks became burning monuments to the consequences of believing your own mythology. July 12, 1943. Late afternoon. The battlefield has fallen quiet. The guns have stopped. The surviving German forces have retreated beyond artillery range. The Soviets are beginning the work of consolidation, recovering their own damaged equipment, counting their dead, preparing for whatever comes next. Across the steppe, smoke rises from burning tanks. German tanks. Soviet tanks. The losses on both sides have been enormous, but the strategic outcome is clear. The German offensive has failed. The Kursk salient will hold. The tide of the war has turned. Somewhere in that landscape, in a sunflower field now trampled flat, a young driver from Hamburg named Fischer lies where he fell. No one will find his body for 3 days. When they do, they will not know his name. He will be buried in a mass grave with dozens of others, his identity lost to time and chaos. He was 20 years old. He liked to sing while he drove. He had a photograph of a girl in Munich that he kept in his breast pocket, and that photograph will burn with him when the burial detail sets fire to the bodies they cannot identify. His commander, Werner Hoffmann, will think about him every night for the next 48 years. He will think about the moment he made the choice. Keep moving or try to save him. He will think about Fischer's voice, calling out, getting fainter. He will wonder if there was something else he could have done, some other choice he could have made. There was not. He knows this. The mathematics of survival do not allow for heroism when the numbers are against you. But knowing something and accepting it are different processes, and some processes never complete. Heinrich Krauss lies dead in his command tank, killed instantly by a round he never saw coming. He died believing he was about to achieve victory. He died with certainty intact. Perhaps that is a mercy. 11 tanks returned from a force of 120. 90.8% destruction. A single morning's work. The lesson is simple and brutal and eternal. Certainty is not strategy. Confidence is not capability. And no amount of belief in your own superiority will stop a shell that has been aimed at your heart. The panzers burned. The sunflowers grew. And history, as it always does, remembered the outcome and forgot the arrogance that made it inevitable.